the lost city of gold. Entire armies vanished, searching for it. But here's what they never told you about El Dorado. Most people think El Dorado was just some made-up story. That's not true. The legend comes from a real ceremony, a ritual so incredible that when Spanish conquistadors first heard about it, they couldn't believe their ears. Let me take you back to what actually started all of this madness. There was this lake high up in the mountains of Colombia, Lake Guatavita, and the Muisca people who lived there had this tradition that sounds like something out of a movie. Whenever a new chief took power, they covered him head to toe in gold dust. Not paint, real gold dust stuck to his body with tree resin. Then they'd put him on a raft with piles of gold and emeralds. The raft would float to the center of the lake while thousands of people watched from the shore. At the exact center, the golden chief would throw all the treasure into the water. Then he'd dive in himself, washing off all that gold dust into the lake. This wasn't a legend. This actually happened. Spanish soldiers who arrived in the 1530s talked to people who had seen it with their own eyes. But somewhere along the way, the story got twisted. The Spanish called the Golden Chief El Dorado. The Golden One makes sense, right? But then something weird happened. People stopped thinking about the Golden Man and started imagining an entire city made of gold, a lost civilization somewhere in the jungle where the streets were paved with precious metals. That shift in the story is what drove thousands of people completely insane. The first major expedition happened in 1541. A guy named Gonzalo Pizarro, brother of the conquistador who took down the Inca Empire, decided he was going to find this golden city. He gathered 220 Spanish soldiers and about 4,000 native people to carry supplies. They headed east from Quito into the Amazon rainforest. This expedition was a nightmare from day one. The jungle was so thick they could barely move. It rained constantly. Their food rotted. People started getting sick. After months of wandering, they'd found absolutely nothing. No gold, no cities, just endless trees and rivers. Pizarro sent his second-in-command, Francisco de Orellana, down a river to find food. He took 50 men and promised to come back. But the current was too strong. Orellana couldn't paddle back upstream. Instead of returning, he just kept going. His group ended up traveling the entire length of the Amazon River, becoming the first Europeans to do it. Meanwhile, Pizarro waited and waited. When Orellana never came back, Pizarro gave up and turned around. By the time he made it back to Quito, only 80 of the original 220 Spanish soldiers were still alive. Almost 3,000 native people had died, all for nothing. But that didn't stop anyone. If anything, it made people more obsessed. In 1561, another expedition set out. This one was led by a man named Lope de Aguirre, and this is where the story gets really dark. Aguirre was already known for being unstable, violent, paranoid, but he convinced a nobleman named Pedro de Urazu to let him join an expedition to find El Dorado. Things went bad fast. Within months, Aguirre led a mutiny. He killed Ursu and took control of the expedition. Then he declared war on the Spanish crown itself. Aguirre and his men floated down rivers, attacking any Spanish settlements they found. He killed anyone who questioned him, including his own men. He even killed his own daughter, because he didn't want her to live in shame after he was gone. Eventually, Spanish forces hunted him down and killed him. But before he died, he wrote a letter to the King of Spain that's still famous today. He called himself the Wrath of God and basically told the king that El Dorado didn't exist. Even after witnessing all that death and madness, people kept searching. Sir Walter Raleigh, the famous English explorer, made 2 trips to South America looking for El Dorado. The first was in 1595. Raleigh was convinced the city was somewhere in Guyana. He sailed up the Orinoco River, asking everyone he met about golden cities. He found nothing. But when he got back to England, he wrote a book claiming he'd been super close. He said he'd talked to natives who told him about a city with golden temples and streets. No one knows if he actually believed this, or if he was just trying to get funding for another trip. 23 years later, in 1618, he went back. By this time, he was old and desperate. King James had him on a tight leash and warned him not to attack any Spanish settlements. but Raleigh's men got into a fight with Spanish soldiers. His own son was killed in the battle. When Raleigh returned to England, empty-handed, King James had him executed. The search for El Dorado literally cost him his head. Now here's where it gets interesting, because while all these Europeans were dying in the jungle, there actually were cities made of gold, just not where anyone was looking. The Inca Empire had temples covered in gold, walls lined with gold plates, gardens with golden corn stalks and golden llamas. When the Spanish conquered the Inca capital of Cusco, they found a temple called Coricancia that had walls covered in gold sheets. There was a golden sun disk, so big it took multiple men to carry it. They melted it all down and shipped it to Spain. So if Europeans had already found and destroyed actual golden temples, why did they keep searching for El Dorado? Because the legend promised something even better. Not just golden decorations, but an entire civilization that was even richer than the Incas. People wanted to believe there was still something out there, something that would make them richer than anyone could imagine. Over the centuries, the location of El Dorado kept moving on maps. First it was in Colombia, then Venezuela, then Brazil, then somewhere deep in the Amazon that no one had explored yet. Explorers would show up in these places, find nothing, and then claim it must be somewhere else. Even in the 20th century, people were still looking. In 1925, a British explorer named Percy Fawcett disappeared in the Brazilian jungle while searching for what he called the lost city of Z. He thought it was basically El Dorado under a different name. Fawcett never came back. Neither did his son or the other man who went with them. Over the next few decades, more than 100 people died trying to find out what happened to Fawcett. His disappearance became almost as famous as El Dorado itself. Now, did any of these golden cities actually exist? Here's the truth. There were advanced civilizations all over South America before Europeans arrived. Cities with thousands of people, complex trade networks, incredible architecture, but they weren't made of gold. The Muisca people who started the whole legend. They were skilled goldsmiths. They made beautiful golden objects for ceremonies, but their houses were made of wood and clay like everyone else. When the Spanish tried to drain Lake Guatavita to get the treasure the chiefs had thrown in, they found some golden objects, but not nearly as much as they expected. They tried draining it multiple times over hundreds of years. Every attempt either failed or found way less gold than the cost of the project. The lake was never some infinite vault of treasure. As for lost cities in the Amazon, archaeologists have actually found evidence of large settlements. Using technology like LiDAR, they've discovered that the Amazon used to have way more people living in it than we thought. There are earthworks, roads, even ancient orchards hidden under the jungle. But none of it looks like El Dorado. These were normal human settlements, not magical golden cities. So why did the legend survive for so long? Because people needed it to be true. The conquistadors had spent everything to get to South America. They'd left their homes, risked their lives, done terrible things. If El Dorado didn't exist, then what was it all for? The legend gave them hope. It gave them a reason to keep pushing forward into unknown territory. And back in Europe, the stories about El Dorado made colonization seem worth it. If there were cities of gold out there, then all the violence and death was justified. The myth served everyone's interests. That's why it wouldn't die. There's something else too. The indigenous people sometimes encouraged these beliefs. If the Spanish were chasing rumors of gold in the jungle, they weren't enslaving villages or stealing land. Some tribes would tell explorers exactly what they wanted to hear. Oh yeah, the Golden City is definitely that way. Just keep walking. It was a survival strategy. The real tragedy is what happened because of El Dorado. Thousands of indigenous people died as guides or slaves on these expeditions. Entire cultures were disrupted or destroyed. Communities were tortured for information about gold they didn't have. The Amazon rainforest is full of unmarked graves from all the people who died chasing this dream. And for what? A ceremony that got exaggerated into a legend that got twisted into a complete fantasy. Today, El Dorado means something different. It's a metaphor. When someone talks about finding their El Dorado, they mean finding something that seems too good to be true. The legend shows up in movies, books, Video games. It's become this symbol of impossible dreams and dangerous obsessions. But the real story is more interesting than any myth. A real ceremony with gold dust and a sacred lake got turned into a legend that shaped the entire colonial history of South America. It drove exploration, funded expeditions, and justified conquest. All because people heard about one golden man and imagined an entire golden world. The lesson here isn't that El Dorado never existed. The lesson is that it existed in people's minds so strongly that it shaped reality anyway. Thousands of people made life-or-death decisions based on rumors and exaggerations. They gave up everything for a dream that was never real in the first place. And maybe that says something about human nature. We're drawn to mysteries. We want to believe there's something incredible, just beyond our reach. Even when all the evidence says we should stop looking, we keep searching. Because what if we're wrong? What if it's real, and we're the ones who give up right before finding it? That's the real power of El Dorado. Not the gold itself, but the possibility of gold. The indigenous people who performed that ceremony on Lake Guatavita probably never imagined what their ritual would become. They definitely didn't predict that hundreds of years later, people would still be talking about it. Their golden chief became the most expensive legend in history. So was El Dorado real. The golden man was real. The ceremony was real. The lake is still there in Colombia if you want to visit it. But the city of gold, that was never real. It was always a dream that people projected onto blank spaces on maps. And maybe that's the most human thing about this whole story. We took something beautiful and turned it into an obsession. We heard about a ceremony and imagined an empire. We saw gold dust on a man's skin and pictured streets paved with treasure. The real El Dorado was inside our heads the whole time. If you want to see more myths like this destroyed, watch the next one.